Good evening. Good evening. It is good to be with you all. This is our Media Monday, and we want to welcome you. I am Andrea King. I'm Director of Communications and Media here at Southeastern California Conference, and I am excited to share this time with you. We are here because we want to equip you for excellence. And I am excited because we have Jamie Dom with us, and I am going to bring her on in just a second. And as you all are coming in and coming on, I want to encourage you to share this. Maybe there are some other people that are going through and they need help with their media, their communications, their social media. And so go ahead and send them a text. Go ahead and like and share as we get started. And so I want to welcome Jamie. Welcome, welcome. It is
Thank
good to have
you.
you.
It's always great to be here, and I'm always excited to talk about digital mission work and the things that we can do to follow the model that Jesus set. And we'll definitely be digging into that today.
Amen. I wonder, is there anybody who's watching that? Because last month we talked about optimizing our YouTube channel. We talked about TubeBuddy. We talked about a lot of things. And I wonder, is there anybody who um, got TubeBuddy and began using it? If that is you, I want you to go ahead and put that in the comments because I think I have something for you. Because I'm excited when people don't just listen, but they apply
Mm-hmm.
the things that we have said, the things that we've learned. And so, if you got TubeBuddy and you have begun to use that at your church, I want you to go ahead and put it in the chat so that we can know that you have. And if you didn't, go ahead and say hello. Let us know where you're watching from. Give us a hi, a wave, a something. And I do have a prize, and I'll probably say that again at the end for those who are coming, because I don't want us to just talk about this. I want us to be about this because
Mm-hmm.
it's so important to share exactly what is taking place. And Jamie, tell me why this is important to you and to churches. Why should it be important in case it may not be important yet?
Well, it should be important because here's the thing, and I'll probably cover this again or repeat it in the presentation. What did Jesus do? Jesus met people where they were with their emotional, their physical, their spiritual, like whatever challenge, whatever felt need, whatever pain points they had in that moment, where they were in that moment, and then he bid them come and follow. So if we want to be serious about following Jesus' model, but scaled up with these digital tools and technologies, then we need to start from an audience focused perspective. Every day, people are asking me, how do we create content that's relevant? How do we be relevant in a digital age? Well, relevancy is when you meet the needs of the audience you're trying to reach. Then you are relevant, because the number one reason why people share content online is they feel it will benefit the lives of others. The church, and I mean all of us, from the individuals up to the division, up to the GC, the churches, everybody, we should be the leaders in creating content that improves the lives of others. But it's not about us. So oftentimes we've been going about ministry backwards. We focus on what we're interested in and what we want to share. If we want to serve people, if we want to make a difference, if we want to make our faith less foreign, if we want to share our messages of hope and wholeness, then we need to start with empathy and start from the audience perspective and what they need and where they are.
Amen. Thank you so much. I have a crazy sound that's coming out of my office. I don't know if you all hear that, but that's why I muted myself. But listen, that must be our signal to get this party started. I want to give a shout out to Apple Valley SDA Church who has installed TubeBuddy. Congratulations. We're so excited that you all are doing that, and we're going to check you out. And I want to send you Jamie's book. She has an amazing book on digital Evangelism, Digital Discipleship. And so we are going to send you that book. And so I'll tell you, you can email me and I'll tell you how we can pull that off. But congratulations. I wanted to get it in the hands of people who are serious about this thing, that we're going to be about it. And so congratulations, Apple Valley, you have won.
Yeah.
And I pray that we are all winners and we all become doers of this word. And so without further ado, Jamie, I'm going to turn it over to you and you can share with us how to understand our audience.
Great. And I just want to say to Apple Valley that I hope you also have the checklist for the YouTube best practices, because that will make a difference. And you're not going to see a change in a day or two. It's going to take persistence and consistency of going through the checklist for every single video and for your channel, and just persisting at doing these things. You're going to see your channel grow, and you're going to start reaching more people who are seeking the information, the messages that you are sharing with the world. So without further ado, today's focus is understanding your audience. And so, yes, I understand that I have drank my own Kool-Aid, but I firmly believe that every single person, ministry, local church, whomever, is uniquely equipped and positioned to reach someone, different types of people, because, Jesus talked about the body of Christ, and that we all can do different things. So I think when it comes to digital missionary work, or just missionary work in general, we all have unique skills and talents and interests. And in the digital space, this mission field that's wide open, we are all uniquely positioned to reach someone, and together we can reach everyone. So, but to say this, it is vitally important that before you create content, write social media posts, or whatever it is you're going to do, that you understand your audience deeply. And this presentation is going to give you a framework for not only successfully defining who your target audience is, but will help you learn how to effectively shape your messages and your content to match your audience's needs and reach them effectively. No matter their age, their gender, their ethnicity, location, situation, language, whatever it is, whether they're churched or unchurched, this is a foundation principle of digital missionary work, is understand your audience. Start your content creative process from an audience-focused perspective. So let me see here. I got to change. Okay. All right. So what we're going to discuss is, surface level demographics, those core values, felt needs. We're going to take a moment to talk about youth and technology, because usually when I hear people talking about, I want to be relevant in digital spaces, they're trying to reach the youth, and this is a very special demographic. They're fleeing the church for a reason. So we're going to take a moment to talk about that and define what you need to understand, particularly about this generation. We're going to talk about cultural empathy. We're going to talk about internal and external audiences, and then understanding the drivers behind cultural shifts. Now, this is a little bit of philosophy, but I think you'll get it when we go through it. And then personas one-on-one, a framework summary, and we're going to touch a little bit on then how you use all this knowledge for content, evangelism. So you may feel like you already know how to use social media platforms for personal sharing, but when you want to write to achieve an evangelistic goal, or create to achieve evangelistic goal, it requires more thought and strategic planning. So hopefully this series and the resources that are going to be provided will help you understand your audience and determine a way to speak to them that is relevant and encouraging engagement, because engagement is also where a lot of ministry really happens. Now, it is essential that we not only communicate clearly with our words, and I also appreciate concise, even though brevity is not my strong suit, but that we also take the time to deeply understand our audience's perspective. This requires an immense amount of empathy, because it doesn't matter if you know what you mean or you think what you have to share is the most important thing in the world. Your audience must immediately understand and connect with your messages and content in order for you to minister to them. Because good communication is when you communicate in a way your audience understands. And I would say that it also connects with them in a way that is relevant to where they are in their spiritual, in their life journey. So you're going to hear me talk about empathy a lot. And you might ask, well, how do we do this? Well, we simply start by putting ourselves in your audience's shoes and speak to them accordingly. Remember, it's not about you and where your interests are and what you want to share. Now, you probably have unique skills and stuff, and hopefully that's going to be matched to your target audience. But you want to speak to your audience in a way and with the words that enable them to understand and connect with your message. This means that when we communicate in digital spaces, we must speak the language of the platform and recognize the cultural expectations and those norms prevalent in the space, as well as, so there's multiple layers here. So it's not just the cultural norms of the digital platform or the digital space, if you're on TikTok or Twitter or whatever, but it's also within the cultures of the people you're trying to communicate to. So we have to think about all the many layers, all the many things that are acting on our audience. So without careful research into our target audience, our words and intentions can be easily taken the wrong way. We see this all the time, right? And, many of us, I know I've posted something on my personal social media and somebody misunderstood and I had to do a correction. And that's normal, that's human. But we don't want to inadvertently offend, exclude, and push away the very people we are trying to reach, particularly in the context of ministry, where people, the unchurched in particular, tend to view Christianity in a negative light. We don't want to encourage those thoughts. We want to draw them to us. We want to draw them to Christ. Now, as I said before, as Christians, we naturally want to reach and include everyone, or we should. This should be our ultimate goal as disciples and digital evangelists. However, from a specific ministry standpoint, this approach ends up reducing the relevancy of your messages, and it spreads efforts too thin for significant impact. So because the standard marketing rule of thumb is if you try to reach everyone all the time, you'll end up reaching no one. But Christ knew this. He knew this when he spoke of the church body working together. We all have something to offer another person, and we can each strategize to leverage the spiritual gifts and talents that have been bestowed upon us. We all have influence, and how we use that influence matters. So what I'm saying is find your place in the digital mission field, in the broader ecosystem, and find your audience and pour everything into a targeted ministry. And as I said before, I firmly believe we all have a purpose and we all have talents. We are uniquely equipped and positioned to reach different types of people. So embrace your skill set, embrace your talent, and embrace who your target audience is. So, as I said, probably many times at this point, it's vital to understand who your audience is before you create content, because you do not want there to be a disconnect. You cannot have impact if your target audience that you're pushing content out to is not interested in the content you're creating. So this next section is going to help you learn to effectively research and empathize with your audience to develop a clear understanding of their felt needs to reach them effectively with relevant content. And you can do this for any audience. As I said before, it doesn't matter age, gender, ethnicity, location, situation, whatever it is. If you put yourself in their shoes and you start with their challenges, their needs, their pain points, you're going to be 10 times more effective in your ministry and in your content. And that's not an exaggeration. So step one, obvious, determine your target audience. So the first step in developing a clear picture, and many of you probably already know this, is to begin with those surface level demographic information. These are those standard marketing buckets that we're all familiar with, even if you've never studied marketing or anything like that. So this is generally the information that is used, in standard evangelism, standard marketing practices for ages. It's those neat little buckets that honestly we don't really fit in anymore, but it is helpful to start here. So standard demographic information includes things like location. Where are they physically located? Are you trying to reach a particular area around your church, maybe within 15 square miles? Are you trying to reach maybe a subset of that? Are you trying to go broader? Are you trying to reach across the U.S. or the world? Like where are they located? Age. You might have several age groups that you're trying to reach, but still define them. Gender. If you have a women's ministry, that's going to be different than like a youth men's ministry, like whatever it is. Ethnicity, language, this is so important. If you're trying to reach a particular group of people, you want to really understand and clarify, their cultural norms and, obviously speak the language. And then their interests. These are those broad categories. But once you've determined these sort of generic surface level characteristics of your target audience, you need to work down to a deeper level. This will help you shape your messaging and the kind of content you'll create, because you want to create deep connections by identifying with core values, needs, and common experiences. Because oftentimes, if you go to my church, it's it's an international church. So what brings all these different age groups and all these different ethnicities together? It's a core value, it's a need, it's a common experience. So you can look at seemingly dissimilar people and find a common thread and realize that they are one target audience. Even if they might encompass many of those surface level demographics. So, as I kind of hinted to before, we don't really fit into those neat little categories anymore that have been used for so long. So when we connect with people on a more profound level, we can transcend the standard marketing, demographics and reach probably even a broader audience, but a target audience that has a similar need. Those are still important, but if you can dig deeper, your audience is loyal to your brand, to the content, to your ministry, because you resonate with them at their core. The best way to do that is to investigate their felt needs, their experiences, their values, their perceptions without judgment. Become a student of your target audience. If you need more information or are just starting out, you can conduct surveys and you can even interview to collect more information. Talk to the people you're trying to reach, candidly, openly, without judgment. You'll be amazed at what you learn. Now, I don't want you to get offended by this next statement, but I'm going to say it anyway. I just talked about being careful with your words, but we have to consider our own blind spots and our biases. The truth is, we don't know what we don't know or are blind to. So in other words, we must put our assumptions and judgment in the trash. Put them aside, get rid of them. Because too often, and I see this, and it's well-meaning, but it's been going on, I think, for too long. Too often we create programs and content based on our own interests and passions, or based on what we think people need, according to our own perspective and our own biases. And I know that might hurt a little. But it's true. Like, we're all guilty of it. It's, confession time. To help correct this natural tendency, start by asking yourself questions that will help you get inside the minds of your audience members, or the people you're trying to minister to. Find out what motivates their actions. What makes them who they are? What do they have in common? How can I speak and write in a way that my audience will find relatable? What do they actually value? And then what do they actually need? Not what I think they need. And yes, you're right. They all need the cross. They all need salvation. They all probably need the health message. They need assurance in these confusing times of turbulence and chaos and uncertainty. They need the peace that knows that, so that they can face the future unafraid. Yes, they need those things, but they don't know they need those things. You have to start with their felt need, then bid them come and follow, just as Jesus did. Because, like I said, he attended to their physical, their emotional, their spiritual needs first, then he bid them come and follow. So we want to knock on doors and say, let me tell you about the 2,300 days. But the reality is, right now, with inflation, everything going on, this person's trying to feed their family. And they're scared. Or maybe they have rising medical costs or something like that. Like, they're not interested in the 2,300 days. They need to know that Christ loves them and cares for them. That is where they are. So, but we have to meet people. What I'm saying is, meet them where they are in their life, in their spiritual journey. And it's not about what we want to share. It's about prioritizing your audience's felt needs, their pain points, their challenges. We do this in order to build a meaningful relationship with them. When we open the door to then when we do that, we can open the door to deeper spiritual connections because they know how much we care. Our faith has become relevant in their lives. So modern examples of felt needs, I've mentioned some of these, but it could be just, safe places for their children, mentorship, a better future, a Christian guidance on real life issues, things that oftentimes the church doesn't want to talk about, food security, abuse recovery, practical life skills training, stuff like that. With this knowledge, we can then build and create and communicate a strategy that directly fulfills their needs. So what this means is when you want to go down to the deep level, you have to understand the following characteristics or lived experiences of your target audience, again, without judgment. Listen more than you speak and do not assume anything. So what are their felt needs? What are their core values? What are their shared experiences? What is their reality? What do they face every single day? We often, a new thing that, has come, I think, in the last 5 years is this concept of generational trauma, environmental, issues, like all this kind of stuff. What is their reality? What motivates them, or what could motivate them? Especially if you're dealing with someone who's struggling with maybe mental health issues or depression or lack of hope. What could motivate them? Or, any additional insights that you come up with. Now, I created I should say, I think we mentioned it, but I created a downloadable fillable worksheet where you can go through and kind of fill all this out for your target audiences. So you'll get that to take with you, and you also will get this presentation. So what you need to know about youth, and again, I said I was going to take a moment to talk about them because this is so important. The church is bleeding youth. All churches are bleeding youth because our faith is not relevant to their daily realities. And that's what needs to change. And we need to change by starting where they are and dealing with the challenges and understanding who they are. So I want to take, this special attention for this topic. We have to understand what makes them unique, what makes them different, and consequently, why they may leave our faith communities or why they feel faith is not relevant to their daily lives. So how is their world different? In so many ways. Youth today live in a totally different world, and they interact totally differently from any generation before them. Prior to COVID, and I still think in a sense this is probably still more significant, but we'll see. They're probably both maybe equally significant, to be fair. But when they were asked, what is the most important historical event in the USA in the past 20 or so years, they responded, the release of the iPhone. Now, this makes sense because given that digital technology has completely reshaped society, how we connect with each other, how we shop, and how we live, they have grown up in almost an entirely digital world, and they relate to technology in a more integrated fashion than any generation that came before them. Technology is not a tool for them. It is how they live. It's how they interact. It's how they exist. It's how they do life. It's how they live life is with technology. And in some sense, maybe the answer has shifted a little bit. They might now say the pandemic, because we now all relate to technology differently, but we still, the older generation, those of us who are older, we still do not interact with technology the way they do. It's a tool to us, but it's how they live. We've just been forced to be more integrated. So here's some important stats, what you need to know when you are targeting this group. They're a large, very large generation. They account for 40% of all U.S. consumers, and they're 1/3 of the total population. They're most diverse generation in history. They don't see diversity unless it's absent, and I can say personally for me, that's true. Like, you don't notice it. It's a given unless it's not there. The majority are non-white. They're actually mostly Hispanic. 1 out of 10 will marry across racial, ethnic lines. Now, I would say within the Adventist Church, it's higher than that. At least here in the DMV, I would say it's significantly higher than that. They use technology for everything, as I said. Like, this is how they do school. This is how they socialize. This is how they do entertainment. They don't go to grocery stores. They order it all online. They read their Bible this way. This is how they cook. They watch hours of YouTube a day. They prefer less public social media, in a sense, where you can exchange more private messages, where they enjoy, obviously, the public stuff like TikTok. But they have a short attention span, and they prefer icons and symbols. Now, this may seem discouraging because they're the least religious generation ever. Only 63% are sure God exists. 35% are completely unaffiliated. 28% have never attended a religious service, and 13% are atheist. But from my perspective, this actually reveals a huge opportunity if we're willing to meet the challenge. I am a previously unchurched person. I was raised in an unchurched household, and in a household that actually viewed Christianity negatively because of my parents' experiences. But I can tell you, it was in some ways easier for me to come to the faith because I didn't have a framework of faith or a view of God already that was my own. Now, I know everyone is unique, but I wasn't necessarily opposed to faith or the Sabbath. It just wasn't part of my life. And then suddenly it became relevant. Somebody made it relevant to me. And so I think we actually have a huge opportunity here. So core values and needs, I talked about, connect with them at their core, find out what they value, find out what their expectations are. The actions, not words component is really important to reaching this generation. And I'll lay out some tips later in this presentation, but 60% of them want their work to benefit the world. They're concerned about humanity's impact. They're worried about success. They've seen the impact of a weak economy and the impact of the student loan crisis, and now we have COVID, and now we have whatever's going on now. They prefer to save over spending. They interact with media, two-way interactivity, and want to work from anywhere. They want it to work from anywhere to fit their lives. It's an expectation they have. They prefer one-to-one social media conversations over lectures. I can tell you when I'm communicating with younger people, it's always direct text. It's always, private conversations. They want leadership opportunities, and they believe in a social gospel. They want to see the actions, not the words. If you want faith to be relevant, you need to show them what it means to be a Christian. So you guys will have this worksheet. Take this in knowledge. I want to take a moment now, because this is a little bit of a longer presentation, to do a little bit of a Q&A on this section before we dig into the cultural empathy section. So if anybody's got any questions, let's take, maybe 5 or so minutes now to answer those questions before we move on to a different section. If you have any.
So I haven't seen any questions yet, and there is a little delay. So we'll wait to see if there's some questions that come in. But one of the questions that I was just interested in knowing from our audience, how would you define, you talked about the event that changed the world forever.
Yeah.
I wonder, for those who are watching with us, what is that event for you? Is it the invention of the iPhone, the pandemic? I think for me, it's probably 9/11. I don't know what others, but I would love to hear that also, just to see the diversity of our audience today.
And I will say, just to interject, that before COVID, there was a huge split. The older generations, like anybody like over like 35, it was 9/11. And after that, it's the iPhone, pretty much. But now, like they have to redo the survey. But I'm pretty sure you then probably have a 3-way split between 9/11, COVID, and the iPhone. I would think the young generation now, especially if you talk to teens, they probably feel that their life is pretty disrupted. But if they thought more holistically about, how would I have survived and connected with people during the pandemic if it wasn't for technology?
Mm-hmm.
How do you see ethnicity in the mix of knowing your audience? Okay, so we're going to kind of talk a little bit about culture in the next section. It is a factor. It is a factor that weighs, but now we're getting into the complexities of, the U.S. in particular being a melting pot. Again, people don't necessarily fit into those neat little categories. I'm going to talk about how ethnicity, in one hand, it can be relevant if you're really trying to reach a particular ethnicity, but if you're trying to reach people who have common shared experiences, then ethnicity could be relevant, but it could also stretch across ethnic lines. A lot of people have the same shared experiences. I think because of history and because of various social factors, we tend to think ethnicity is this huge divider. But if you actually start talking to people, you realize there's a lot of shared experiences. There's a lot of, young women are dealing with self issues, self, concepts of self, of beauty and pressures and, over sexualization and all that kind of stuff. It doesn't matter what their ethnicity is. You have young men are worried about success and worried about, leadership opportunities, all that stuff. Ethnicity becomes less relevant when you're sharing those, when you're talking about those shared values. But if you're also talking about certain social justice issues, then yeah, ethnicity might, is obviously more relevant when you're speaking or dealing with an issue that's unique to a group of people, such as descendants of slaves. So it's a factor, but it depends on your target audience, whether or not ethnicity. So I'll jump ahead just a little bit because I find this very fascinating. If you look at really big brands like REI, they don't target an age group. They don't target an ethnicity. They target a worldview. They target a core value, and that is to go outside and explore. And so depending on the nature of your ministry, ethnicity might be relevant or it might be less relevant, depending on what the core value is or the lived experience.
Thank you for that. And I think this question kind of touches on this a little bit too. Is it possible to just skip this step and just decide the age group and demographic we want to reach? Would you?
Well, again, I would challenge, like, is the content you're going to create going to be exclusive to one ethnicity? It might be. It's possible. There's, like I said, we're all positioned to reach different people. It is possible that your particular ministry is going to be only relevant to a particular ethnicity or a particular age group. You can decide, I want to reach just this age group, and I'm going to be particularly talking about these issues which are unique to this particular demographic community. That is possible.
It's possible. But I don't think I've seen a church that really just has one group of people. Just one.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I know, like, out here in DC, we have some churches where, like, everyone's Brazilian. Like, we have the Brazilian church or something. But if you go, Brazil is an incredibly diverse, like, nation. So again, it's like, well, it's a Brazilian church because they all speak that flavor of Portuguese, not necessarily because they're all the same ethnic background. If that makes sense.
It does.
So, and then, so I think before I answer Gary's question, let's jump into the next section because I think this might help, and it might help clarify a little bit of what Daniel's saying and what Leslie is saying. So let's jump into this next section, and you'll see what I'm talking about when I talk about cultural, what I'm talking about, the complexities of cultures now. And then in a little bit later, we're going to actually talking about the shifts in society and the cultural shifts in society that impacts everyone in the Western world. So the concept of cultural empathy is well known in the physical mission field. But again, we tend to narrowly define it as ethnic groups and languages and people groups in specific locations. And of course, evangelism experts know that the best way to reach a community or people group is to empower a member of that community to evangelize to their own. Or at the very least, learn to speak the language of the people and show sensitivity and respect to their cultural paradigms. But we have forgotten this principle when it comes to digital evangelism and online communities. While digital evangelism or discipleship is a new concept for the church, we can remember and apply these tried and true bits of wisdom previously learned by experienced evangelists and geographically focused missionaries. So we can apply this idea into the modern world. So the Apostle Paul admonishes us to become all things to all men, that I may by all means save some. So we live in a world of intersecting cultures or communities, and therefore our definition of culture must expand. Many now find themselves between cultures and functioning in multiple communities simultaneously, and I'll explain what I mean by this because I'm a really good example of that. Cultures, in order to identify the unifying threads between seemingly dissimilar people, we need to first unpack their many cultural influences. These cultures are potentially endless in variety, but can include It can be platform. There's a different culture on Reddit as there is on TikTok, as there is on Twitter. So the platforms have their culture. Age groups or generations. I would say that different generations have a culture. Gender, language, people groups. Again, there's your race, but it's more complicated than ethnicities. The immigrants versus first generation. First generation, they have their own thing going on. We're different from direct immigrants. Those are different cultures, subcultures. Current location. Do they live in the city, the suburbs, or the country? Are they in school? Are they out of school? Being in school has its own culture. You have the collegiate culture versus out of school. Have they lived in a specific geolocation their whole life versus being a transplant? Faith groups. Are they lifelong Christians? Are they converts versus former Christians or non-believers? I'm a former non-believer, and I can tell you in the Adventist church, there's a subculture of converts because we understand the learning curve. We are a unique people, and we come at it from an outsider perspective. Professional groups versus homemakers versus working moms, college educated versus blue collar workers, and those of us who have crossed that line. I come from the blue collar world, but now I'm in the white collar world. Offline social clubs versus online identities and groups. Poverty versus middle class versus wealthy, and those of us who have jumped those different cultures. So just to dig into an example of what I mean by this is a practical example. So this is me versus my grandparents, who would have been effectively marketed to as a monolithic group and not as unique individuals. So my grandparents on my mother's side are part of a homogenous community of Italian immigrants living in the Midwest. Specifically, they were Sicilian, which is its own little subgroup. Coal miners, Catholic, everyone ate the same, worshiped the same, spoke the same language. The entire community functioned around the same industry. They were isolated from the general population because they weren't welcome, and the same education, etc. They were a monolithic group. The times have changed. Now you have, I would say I'm more of the norm, especially in the big cities. You have a Midwestern transplant to Washington, D.C. I'm a Zennial, so I'm between generations. I'm first generation college educated. I'm an Adventist convert. I'm a vegetarian. Now I'm gluten-free. That's its own culture. I'm a professional woman. I'm a mompreneur. I'm a techie. I'm a working mother, a business owner. Multicultural friend group. So if you look at my friend group, we're all over the place. But I still have strong ties to an Italian, Sicilian specifically on my mother's side, and then Jewish, cryptic Jewish on my father's side. So cultures through immigrant families. I'm a complex mess. Like if you look at and you really start breaking it down, people do not fit in monolithic groups anymore. We got a whole lot more going on. And this is what I mean by this. So how do you reach someone like me? And take a moment, and you can do this, later as you're going through the worksheet or whatever. Think about your own intersecting cultures and how they may shape your core values and needs. What is working on you? Why are you who you are? And, look at your church community or your target audience. What are the overlaps in cultures? How might they influence behavior and needs? And what unifying factors can you identify? Can you look at your church? And if you have a multicultural church, which I hope you do, what's the unifying factor that brings seemingly dissimilar people all together to worship every Sabbath and as part of your community and part of Pathfinders? What are the unifying factors that you can identify? So now the next section is thinking about internal versus external. And again, I think this is really important to consider as Adventists because we use a lot of language that creates barriers for converts. I can say this from personal experience. Ask yourself, especially if you're trying to do evangelism, are you speaking to members or non-members of the Adventist church? Your language may change and should change based on the answer to that question. We have to modify the ways we communicate in order to effectively reach different audiences without creating barriers. With my husband and I's digital ministry, Angels in the Glen, we are both converts. We do not use any Adventist speak, nothing, and we do that on purpose. We are strategically speaking to an external audience because we know what it's like to say things and just assume people mean, and it's totally innocent. It's done innocently. But I remember coming into a church and there was a learning curve that you had to push through. And so we try to not create those barriers in our own speech. And an example of this is, when we're talking to our friends, we might use certain vernacular that tends to be more playful and friendlier. But if we're talking to our boss or elders or grandparents, our persona might be more serious and professional. So we change our tone, we change our language based on who we're speaking to. We should do the same when it comes to digital evangelism. Like I said before, I'm a convert. We're a peculiar people. Make sure you're not using language that is foreign or confusing to non-Adventists. Like present truth is a really confusing term. We are working with a woman that we've been speaking to for almost a year now through our ministry. She's going to get baptized on July 16th, and we're super excited for her. But she called us one day and was like, "What is present truth? I keep hearing present truth," and we had to explain it to her. And we're like, "Yeah, we have a lot of phrases that you might hear in the church that you're going to now that aren't intuitively understood by outsiders, and we have to be careful of that kind of stuff." And luckily, she's convicted enough, and she has somebody that she can call and ask without feeling embarrassed. You don't want people to feel excluded by language they don't understand, because a lot of people, more than you think, are actually turned away because of our words, because people really don't want to look dumb and they don't want to feel dumb. So here are some groups to consider. There's more. So internal audiences, we're talking about church members, leaders. You get the idea. External, this is broader community. These are the people, the unchurched you're trying to reach. This is related causes, nonprofits. It could be even local news if you're doing PR stuff. Former members, Christians. They're former members, so they might actually have a negative, visceral response to Adventist speak. And we've actually dealt with that too with our ministry, where we've had people reach out to us and they're like, "Yeah, I was a former member of the church. I really like how you handle it. We like your language. It helps draw me in. Otherwise, I think I would want to reject what you're saying." And so that's another group of people we're working with, other faith groups and non-believers. So consider who you're communicating with on a regular basis and what changes you may need to make in your ministry or in the ministry you're going to create. So I want you to take a moment to think about this question, and you can even share in the chat box. I would love that. We can even discuss it a little bit. But what barriers to faith or entry may you be accidentally creating with your words? Present truth is a great one. Now, this next section, and then we'll kind of discuss, I think after this, is this idea of speaking to the collective we. So we have all these layers of understanding your audience. But this is where we're going to get into a bit deeper into the psychology of communication. And if you're really interested, there's this book, it's called The Pendulum, and it provides an analysis of the current shifts in society and their impact on marketing, technology, and communications. And it also provides insights into, what we can call the drivers behind these collective shifts in society. So to better understand how to communicate more effectively to our audiences and fulfill their needs, I recommend that you read this book, or you can actually read my blog post on the book. There's also a chapter in my book that covers this challenging topic of communication. And then I'm having trouble finding my arrow. Okay, there it is. So it's difficult. I think part of me doesn't like this, but for some of us to consider just how predictable as people we really are, we like to think that our time and our situation is unique. We naturally resist this idea that perhaps mankind has been in a similar situation before, and it has, just not with the technology we have. But the Bible tells us this is true. What has been will be again, and what has been done will be done again. There is nothing new under the sun. It's just our tools change, our technologies change. So Pendulum, if you're familiar with the Strauss and Howe Generations book, it takes those 4 generations. If you're familiar with those, there's the idealist, the reactive, the civic, and adaptive. And it actually simplifies it, reduces it to 2 generations that each cover 40 years. So there's an 80-year cycle. And one end of the pendulum is individuality, freedom, uniqueness, and the potential of me. This picked in the 1980s. And if you think about it, yeah, that was like idol worship and big hair and bright colors and all that crazy stuff. And strangely, a lot of brown. To the collective we, which is where we are now. We are peaking in the collective we, where we work together for the common good. We want to fix society's greatest problems. We reject the pretense for authenticity and transparency. Sound familiar? both unsettling and, for me, it's a little comforting because it helps you realize what's going on, and that will eventually start going back the other direction. And basically what the book says is the best place is in the middle of the two. Both extremes are actually really bad, where you have to balance the collective we with the rights of the individual, and the needs of the individual is somewhere in the middle. We're sort of on the end of the spectrum where the collective we often maybe hinders the rights of the individual. But basically, the main point is that group behavior is predictable. We're predictable. And so to maximize results, we should fish where there's a potential for the greatest catch. There will be outliers, but outliers are, by definition, the minority. So we can use this predictability to speak to the masses, essentially. To communicate, we must ask what is driving the actions and the attitudes of the group. So this goes back to what I talked about before with the core values, those motivating factors. And this is us as a society right now. This is Western society. So you determine how your mission and your message fits or can be positioned into the paradigm. You don't have to change your mission, but you may have to change how you position your content and the words you use to talk about your mission to your audience. And this is where it gets a little scary, and this should seem very familiar to you. And I'm not going to go deep into politics because I don't feel as a Christian anyone. First of all, I reject tribalism. I'm an independent, and I don't think as a Christian you should create divisions based on political beliefs. But I'm just going to point out some things that we're all very aware of. And this is where it's a little scary because this book was written, I think, like 15 years ago. But the authors accurately predicted what we are now seeing in our societal unrest. The authors are Christian, and they actually wrote the book as a warning because the peak we often results in severe unrest, and we haven't quite peaked yet. So I strongly recommend you read the book, but but as I said, we can look at this and see what we're seeing in society. So if you look at the we, which is where we are, I'm not going to focus on the me part because that was the 80s. We're in the we. It's this I'm okay, you're not okay witch hunt. We see this with the Twitter, with the cancel culture, basically. We see this witch hunt mentality where the swarm happens before, you're guilty until proven innocent, basically, versus innocent until proven guilty. We demand conformity for the common good. We saw that with the pandemic, and that's not necessarily bad, but it can sometimes cause harm. It applauds personal responsibility. That's a good thing. Believes a million men are wiser than one. That's where we get the crowdsourcing, the crowdfunding. We get all this collective knowledge. This is where we have all these groups on Facebook where people share all these mom groups, and we get information from each other, and we share ideas. It's this idea that working together, we're smarter, which is, I think, a very positive thing. We want a better world. Again, that's a positive thing. It's about small actions. Desires to be part of a productive team versus I, the hero, doing it alone. We want it more for teamwork. It admires humility and thoughtful persons. It believes leadership is this is the problem as I see it, let's solve it together. And it strengthens society's sense of purpose and focusing on solving problems. Now, one thing that happens is anti-heroes. So this is where you see very flawed individuals rising to the surface, oftentimes in leadership positions. And you see this in sort of the we part of the pendulum. And so, but again, I believe that God, not man, is in control. And we must always consider his goals and who he sets up kingdoms, not us. Now, an example of these shifts in marketing, which is where it's really relevant for us, is when we look at marketing language. So you have to look at successful advertising campaigns that target a worldview, attitude, instead of an age group. So L'Oreal sells makeup. They have always changed makeup. So whatever your mission is or whatever it is, you don't have to change your mission. Like L'Oreal, they've always sold makeup. They're not going to change what they sell. But their old slogan was because I'm worth it. That's a very me. It's a very idol worship. I'm the hero. Everything's about me. That's very 80s. As a society passed the tipping point of 2003, The me became fully unwound, and the old slogan was replaced with, because you're worth it. And so now the value is projecting out. It's not look at the idol, look at the model. It's you're valuable. And actually, I think that's very positive languaging, and it's not a bad thing. Another example of this is the old army slogan. It used to be all that you can be. You're the hero, basically. And then it changed to army of one right at the tipping point, and this completely flopped. Because contrary to the idea of teamwork and the direction that we were going as a society. And so they had to change it to a more focused we slogan, which is Army Strong. And then, they show all the ads with like teamwork and people working together, and you're part of doing the greater good. And so they got on board with the collective shift in society. So the values of the collective we that are acting on your target audience. So this goes back to what we said before, those core values, there's underlying drivers. What is it that we should be showing in our content and our messaging? Because if we understand these underlying principles, it can provide guidance and it can strengthen our ability to reach our audience. So we values authenticity. It values teamwork, humility, small actions, personal responsibility. And here's what's important, and this is super important for the church, and I can't drive this home enough: cold, hard truth. And this is something the church has trouble with when we don't want to talk about the difficult topics, and we don't want to talk about it candidly, or we often come from a place of judgment. And so a really good example of a ministry taking this and showing what this could mean for the church. What they did was Gorgeous to God, which was a teen ministry that tackles difficult issues that young girls are facing. And they now added A Rugged Journey, which is for young men. And what it does is it's humility, it's straight talk, it's a genuine point of view of what the church needs to embrace. We see the effectiveness of the strategy because it's a community of young Christian women tackling real issues from a godly perspective. They don't have all the answers, but they're honest, they're open, and they're answering the questions and sharing true stories that the church doesn't usually want to talk about. And the stories come from experiences of real girls. They're shared and communicated in a candid way, not in a disrespectful way, not in a vulgar way, just a candid way that the church has not previously embraced. The topics include things like rape, self-harm, sex before marriage, abortion, depression, abuse, and other uncomfortable topics that young people, if you want to know how to reach young people, deal with the issues they are facing and provide a Christian perspective, because otherwise they're going to get help and advice from the world. And we need to provide the Christian perspective for these very real issues, because the issues in the world are the issues in the church, whether or not we want to face that reality. All right, so we can now take a moment to answer some more questions about this section before we break into the next section when we talk about how to put all this together into a persona, and then how this ties into then creating the content for evangelism.
Okay, it looks like that's not a question, but the complexities of culture are helpful.
Yeah, well, I like to use myself as an example because it's like I'm a complicated mess. And then also, if you're partially cryptic Jewish, then that's like a whole other issue. There's like a subculture of that, of people who like found out later in life that they were actually ethnic Jews, but it was hidden because of the Holocaust and like all this other complicated stuff. But anyway.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So Lizzie asked, how can you bring people to Adventist faith without using those peculiar words or beliefs?
Really? Well, you use practical language to speak about it. Like, we'll start by saying, let me tell you about the great disappointment. Well, why don't you talk about what actually happened in 1844 and the information and the truth of what was released? Or when we talk about the health message, unfortunately, and again, I'm saying this as a convert who loves my church, we often present the health message from a place of superiority. And unfortunately, a lot of Adventists kind of elevate their vegan diets above the Bible. And that's not helpful to people. So when we start speaking to people and say, this is how you can live a better life, this is how you can feel better, this is the mind-body connection of how you can better connect with God because you'll be clearer of mind, you'll feel better, you'll have more energy. Like, we just don't use the language, the peculiar words we usually use, and just talk about it more directly, I would say. You don't have to hide your beliefs. It's not that you ignore or hide or bury your beliefs. I definitely don't want you to think I'm talking about that. It's that you present our beliefs in a way that people understand, that they can connect with, that is relevant to them. You do not shy away from our beliefs. That is not the goal of this presentation.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. I don't know if there are any other questions, and if not, um, oh,
Oh, close of probation is another. Yeah, people don't know what that means.
right. Now, I
And
don't know.
somebody's, yeah, I was going to get to that one.
Okay, so yeah, I didn't know if you got into. Are you gonna? Do you want to answer it in the future, or do you want to answer this
I'll
now?
answer this one now because I just wanted to cover a little bit of the cultural stuff and say, where have you done it? How have you done it where you are? So when I'm working with different churches and stuff like that, there's a couple of clients I'm working with now. Oftentimes, it's you have a few people that are totally on board, and they have to convince the rest of the board, or the stakeholders, so to speak. And a lot of it is I just talk to them. I say, I do a short presentation for them, and one of the things that really sticks to them is that we're following the model that Jesus set. So we go about ministry backwards. We're trying to get people to come to our events. We're trying to get people to come to 30 days of Daniel and Revelation, which, and I say that as our ministry is Daniel and Revelation. Like, it's really important. But the average person on the street might not be there yet. And so I point out to them that Jesus met people with their felt needs, and that opened the door to spiritual conversion, because suddenly you're ministering to them in a practical way. So your faith is less foreign. They see that gospel of action in their lives, and you build a relationship, you build trust. This is what Christ did. He drew close to those he wanted to minister to, and he met the needs that they had at the moment, and then he bid them come and follow. So we really want to just like knock on doors and baptize people. And we've been doing this for a while, but the reality is, if they're going to stay in the church, they have to have a connection. They have to know we genuinely care. They have to have the relationship. And, I hear these stories where people said, yeah, we had somebody who sat through, our 6 week, prophecy course. And at the end, they're like, you still didn't answer my question. They sat through 6 weeks hoping that their question was going to get answered. And there was no mechanism for them to actually get the issue that they were facing addressed. And so there's a little bit of a disconnect. Yes, there are people that are ready for that part. They're in that part of their spiritual journey. But if we want to reach a broader community, if we want to reach the people who are previously unreached, we need to start where they are. That doesn't mean compromising on our beliefs or anything like that, but it means understanding them without judgment and actually starting to help them in a more practical way. It's feeding the 5,000. It's ministering to the needs of the single mother or the teen mother or whatever it is, and then bidding them come and follow, because you've built a relationship. There's trust. You can speak into their lives because they know you care about them.
Absolutely. I think one of the ways that it was helpful for me to recognize this is we have no problem learning culture if we're going to be a missionary. We learn the language, we talk the language, we'll learn the dress, we will completely uproot and change our lives, and we'll just do that for, it could be a year before we even bring up maybe our beliefs. And so we're completely okay with it. And I think what people need to understand is that this is a mission field. Our young people have a different language. Unchurched people have a different language, they have a different dress, they have a different diet, they have all of these things. And I mean, Jesus knew that we were a hot mess, but yet he put on skin, he put on humanity, he came down, talked our language, lived in a womb. And so I think that's what we're being called to do, like completely be okay with putting some of our things aside for a second, just so that we can understand who we're talking to, the language that they speak, what they're going through, and then we can show them, it doesn't have to be like this always. There is an answer. And
Yeah, and I think we have trouble because we've kind of become a bubble people. Like I talk to people all the time. They're like, "Well, I don't have any contacts that aren't Adventists." That's a huge problem. He God calls us to not be of the world, but we are in the world, and we should be using our interactions with others to minister to them. And a really good example I always talk about is um, at a church, and of course I'm very big on the details because I don't want anybody to feel bad, but there was a young man who came into the church who I actually knew from being a musician in the arts world, but he came to church dressed with a lot of jewelry and in a dress. But he came to church. I was the only one who came, sat down beside him, and gave him a hug. Now, I knew him from being a musician in the area. I knew him. There was already a relationship there, but I was the only one. And the hard thing is when I think about it, it's like if I didn't know him, would I have gone up to him? And I should have.
mm-hmm.
And so we've kind of barricaded ourselves, and we don't know how to talk to outsiders, and we don't know how to minister to where someone is. Like we want them to kind of get all cleaned up and dusted off before they come into our bubble. And the reality is we need to meet them where they are, whatever they are, without whatever their felt need is, whatever it is.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I'm going to let you finish your presentation.
Okay. Okay. Let me go back. I don't know why I have a little bit of it. So I have to toggle to like get the little arrows. So that's why sometimes I probably stare off for a second. So the last part is, well, second to the last part is when communicating to your audience, I want you to visualize actual people, their interests, their culture, their wants, their needs, and expectations to refine your voice. You'll probably need to create unique personas to represent different target groups within your audience. So this is where we complete the picture. And it doesn't have to be that complicated. So what is a persona? It's a fictional person or character that communicates the primary characteristics of a group or segment of your audience and takes into consideration their needs, their demographics, their motivations, and their environment. Use the framework I've laid out to help you create your audience personas. That worksheet has it all in there in order to help you develop and write content that will be relevant and useful to your audience, because suddenly you're talking to a real person. The best personas combine both qualitative and quantitative information. In other words, data like age and income and whatever socioeconomic status combined with felt needs and core values. So here's an example. The key to finding out what those people want and need, the rest is simply compiling those qualities into a made-up person. So here's an example of a young, Gen Z person. He's a college persona. He comes from an adopted family, married siblings, no siblings, married parents, sorry, no siblings. It is late here for me. So their siblings aren't married parents. No siblings, Hispanic. What his goals are: he wants to find a good paying job, mentoring younger peers, finding a girlfriend, finding a Christian friend group. Challenges: he's at a secular college. He wants to find friends with similar morals. He wants to avoid drugs, alcohol, food insecure. I can tell you a lot of college kids are food insecure. I was one of them. Feels rejected by his biological parents and struggles to connect, struggles with religious doubt. What his values are, and this really hits the core of the young generation: fair justice system, the environment, good reputation, strong character, fairness, good citizenship, technology and flexibility, diversity, leadership training and experience. What his fears are, the fears of many of us: the unknown, work-life balance, affording college, student loan debt, getting a job, rejection, finding purpose, meaning. His preferred platforms, and then messages. I just theorized some messages that would connect with him. But of course, this is all going to be based on your ministry and what you're specifically trying to tackle with it. So as a church, we need to constantly find ways to reach our audience for the kingdom in the best, most effective way possible. So you may have noticed that empathy is a common theme of mine. So to reach people, we must connect with them without judgment, but with love and understanding, because creating social media personas is a valuable exercise. It enables us as communicators to step into another's shoes and view life from their perspective. They help us develop empathy with our audience. And this is really important. And, I read all these parenting books because now I'm a parent. And one of the things they were talking about is developing empathy with your child. And I realized that this has direct application to what we do. They talk about, you might be frustrated or you might not understand why your child's behaving a certain way. And they say, stop, slow down, don't get mad, ask them questions, find out why they're upset. Maybe there's a compromise, but try to see it from their perspective. And I realized that we do this. We often look at our target groups and we say, oh, I wish they wouldn't do that, or I don't like that about them, or we're super judgy, right? We don't understand why they do what they do. But what I'm pleading with you to do is to stop, look at them empathetically, ask questions, and see where our messages of hope and wholeness can fit in. See where you can serve them. See where you can meet them without judgment. Just like Jesus did with the woman caught in adultery, or the woman at the well, or the leper. Like, see the world through their perspective. Don't judge. Don't shy away. And see what it is that they actually need. And you might change. You might really find that this is incredibly powerful ministry. And I will say this: when it talks about personas, people often ask me, "Well, who is my persona for Angels in the Glen?" And our personas are our former selves, my husband and I. My husband was raised in, typical evangelical, non-denominational church his whole life, but he didn't really know the Bible. So we're speaking to those people that really want to learn more, but they just sort of have this lukewarm faith. They're not really living the way they should. And then for me, it's the unchurched. It's the people that feel like there's something out there, but they can't get direct answers, and they actually do want to understand what the Bible says, and they want to understand how it's relevant, and they want proof that the Bible is the truth. And so our personas for our ministry, we deeply understand because it's our former self. And I can tell you, because we're targeting core values and lived experiences, we reach people of all ages, pretty evenly, young and old, which actually surprises me because it's kind of long form content, pretty evenly across all age groups, all genders, and we've heard from pretty much every ethnic there is. So when you reach these core values, when you consider the lived experiences and what someone might be seeking for, the answers they need, what are they going online and Googling? This is where you can create content that's relevant, that can really reach people. An end quote for consideration: no one should know more about your audience than you do. Become an expert on the people you are trying to reach. Once you're an expert on your audience, you can dig deep into content evangelism. And we'll just kind of... So here we can talk a little bit about a persona before we touch on content evangelism. See if anybody has some questions here about this section, or if you have any thoughts, Andrea.
I love the idea, and maybe this is what Leslie was talking about, and just kind of picking that persona. But I love the thought of going deeper into the values and the things that people care about, and so I just love this deeper demographic. And you may not have to subscribe to a study or something, because I think that was one of the problems Leslie was facing. Getting a study may be a challenge, but recognizing and personalizing. I think sometimes we do well to reach people that we know.
Yeah.
And so I think there's definitely some wisdom in that.
Yes, that is kind of where I was going. Go good, Leslie. Anybody have any other thoughts before we kind of touch on content evangelism? I like to break this session up into these little Q&A sections, because there's a lot of information. It's a lot to think about, especially when you get into like the pendulum and the drivers in society, because that sometimes kind of freaks people out.
Mm-hmm.
I think that speaking people's language is a radical idea for SDAs. Yes, unfortunately, you are correct. And I think I think God has a plan, and I think God is using me because I'm a convert. And with our ministry, like if you go to our ministry, it looks completely different than anything you've ever seen from an Adventist church. Because usually when you talk about Bible prophecy, it's like earth on fire in the background. It's like Revelation speaks peace, but something's always burning. I don't understand. Like, um, like it's our branding went in a totally different direction. It does not look Adventist. Because a lot of our stuff, I hate to say it, is like really cheesy and dated looking and kind of scary. Like it's not, we want to preach hope and to face the future unafraid, but the images we use are terrifying. Like, that's also just a branding thing. You want to make sure that your images match the message, but with ours, we went in a totally different direction. We don't hide that we're Adventist, but it doesn't look traditionally Adventist. We try to make it, very modern, appeal to a more broader, type audience, and we're very careful with our language.
I love that you mentioned that, the having a congruent message and graphics.
Because I see it, and I pick on Revelation 6 piece, but I see it. Like, my husband and I was driving through Michigan a few years ago, and we saw a billboard, and I was like, that's got to be us. And I like looked it up, and I was like, yeah, that's us. Like, that's definitely us. Because it's like, some hopeful message, and then something on fire in the background, and like a clock. It's like terrifying. And I say this jokingly, but I also say it like seriously and lovingly. Like, people do not wish to be more afraid right now. Like, anxiety is through the roof, depression's through the roof, drug overdoses are through the roof. Our society is very sick right now. You can probably attract more with honey than you can with fire and brimstone. Mm-hmm. And I can tell you just from the testimonies that we get coming in from Angels in the Glen, like they're just, the people are so happy and so relieved, and so, because it's all like everything that we talk about is always bringing it back to Jesus, always bringing it back to God's love, and not, scary judgment and grapes of wrath. And of course we talk about that stuff, but it's how you talk about it that matters.
Absolutely.
And I think it's a little easier to see that when you come from outside the church, because if you're raised in the church, you're very much used to a certain style of preaching. You're very much used to a certain way to showcase the message. And I'm just saying that there's other ways that are going to attract different audiences and some of the audiences that you're trying to reach. And even with our ministry is a good example of that. Is it's taken off way more than we expected. We still haven't finished all the study guides for Daniel, because when I posted it online in March 2020, then COVID hit, and it took off like crazy. And now we're creeping up on 1 million views, and we have 11,000 subscribers to our email list, and we have regular donors and all this kind of stuff. And it's different, and people say that consistently, like it's different. And Adventists find us too. Like, a lot of Adventists find us, and they're very pleasantly surprised, and they like it. And of course, we can't reach everyone, because I believe everyone's able to reach a specific group of people, but I think we're doing very well at reaching our group of people. So why don't I go on and finish with the last few thoughts here. So framework, summary. So because in order to shape your message to create a desired response in your target audience, you must understand what and with what language will most resonate with your audience. So you have these simultaneous factors acting on your audience at all times. All of this builds up to you effectively shaping your messages and developing content that matches your audience's needs and reaches them effectively, no matter their age, gender, ethnicity, location, or situation. I can tell you with Angels in the Glen, I have a lot of ministries that ask me, and they're like, oh, we want to reach a diverse set of people. Should we get a diversity of speakers? And I'm like, you can, but it's not necessary. I mean, if you have something relevant, like with Angels in the Glen, you can also mix up your images you use. Like, we use a lot of images and stuff in our thumbnail and our pictures that show different types of people, but we can't change the fact that our speaker is, a white male. but we're reaching people from all over and all demographics and all different age groups and ethnicities. You can reach people if you have a good message, and you're phrasing it in a way that speaks to them and answers their felt needs. So the summary is you got your service level demographics, you have your deep level core values and needs, you have your culture empathy, internal versus an external audience, you have your drivers behind collective shifts, and then you can create your personas, and then you're ready for some serious content evangelism. And I will say this with the internal and external audiences, even if you're speaking solely to an external audience, you will still attract Adventists, and they'll appreciate it because they'll still be able to understand what you're talking about. So you don't have to worry about that. So when I say, after going through this understanding your audience worksheet, you should have a clear understanding of what your audience barriers to faith are and their life challenges. Now you can try to diminish them through your content, through your messages. And you can ask yourself questions like, what questions might they have that you can answer? What questions could they have about your church or beliefs? What questions might they have about God? What would encourage them to attend a church or reach out to a Christian to better understand Jesus, salvation, or the Bible? What issues are they facing? What could encourage or help them in hard times? And what are their barriers to faith or barriers to entry in your church? If you can answer these questions, then you will have an excellent start with your content evangelism. All right, and then there's actually a separate worksheet. This is content evangelism, and it actually goes into how to also use like Google autofill, and I can demonstrate that for you if you want to see, to not only then take your topic that you want to address and then figure out how people are actually searching for that information that'll help you with search engine optimization. And I can demonstrate that if you guys are curious. Of course, we have the book if you want to learn more. And now we can just go to a direct Q&A. Let's see here. Find you guys again. Okay.
So are we finished with our present?
Yep, you can kill that one.
Okay. Now, I just want to remind everybody, if you are not registered, all of these wonderful bonuses and resources you will not be able to get. So make sure you do register. We did put the link in the chat, or you can go to seccadventist.eventbrite.com. The link is in the chat. And if you go there, you can register, and then we'll have your email address so that we can email out this presentation and the worksheets that she was talking about. And so thank you again, Jamie, for providing all these extra goodies that we need. And, I was in one of your seminars where churches had the opportunity to go through these worksheets together. And so I see a few pastors on here, and there may be some other church teams that you want to just take this and not do it on your own, but maybe schedule a board meeting and say, let's go through this and determine as our ministry, who are the people that we believe God is calling us to reach. And going through that and then being very intentional about that. And so we want to provide these resources for you to help your church go to the next level. And so once again, thank you, Jamie.
No, you're most welcome. So, does anybody have any other questions?
Well, I tell you what, we'll give you a few more moments to ask questions, put your questions in the chat while I tell you about two things that are coming up. So we're excited. Number one, we have Jamie with us next month too, and she's going to be doing her presentation on moving from viewership to discipleship. And that was probably one of the first presentations I saw from you, and it was a game changer. And I just praise God for it. And I want to encourage every pastor. If your pastor is not on here tonight, that is the one. We want your pastors, elders, Bible workers, media people, everybody to be there for that. And then also we have a media training that's going to be in person at the conference office on August 28th. I have a short promo that I want to show you, and then I see a question in the chat that we're going to get to as soon as we see this promo and prepare our hearts and minds to begin. Get ready to register. And so in a second, we're going to check this promo out. So I hope that you all will be looking for information on registration. We're going to register. There is a cost for this conference, but for those of you who sign up, where we continue to ask all of our media people to go to our website and sign up so that we can communicate with you. I'm going to be sending a special code for our media people that have signed up so that you get the hookup. Membership has its privileges. And so you're going to get the hookup for that. So, and if you register very soon, you'll be able to register for free. And so make sure you check your emails for that. And so we're excited about that. And I know we have these questions, and so we want to put that up, and Jamie will go ahead and help us with.
Okay, yeah, I wasn't sure if you're going to read it or what, but yeah, I understand that frustration, and I don't want you to like chase members out of your church or something, but at the end of the day, like they already understand it, and so I would just try to communicate with them like you're trying to reach outsiders. Now, the message that you preach in your church, that that's for your internal audience, but if you're going to create content externally, or you're going to now start tailoring your sermons to go externally, then I would definitely hang out for the next presentation, because we're going to basically talk about how every member can get on board with this idea of digital ministry, and they have their role to play. Some of that might mean like working with those members that don't understand. Like the message isn't changing. We're just speaking in a way others understand. It's like saying, oh, you're not speaking the truth because you're speaking in Spanish. No, it's just translate it. Like you're translating essentially our messages to the external world. And I think working with them, they'll know like you have a role to play, you have a part. If you're online, you have influence, and what you do with that influence matters. And so I think it helps to communicate and bring people along, because you also don't want to exclude them or push them away either. So again, I think that's an opportunity for education. And you could even say like, every fourth Sabbath, I'm going to preach a sermon for the outsiders, and just kind of prep them for it or something. I don't know. You could try different things. But the convenience that we have with our ministry is because it's a separate, entirely evangelistic thing. We just do it, and we've had even overwhelming positive feedback from Adventists, because I think a lot of Adventists just want to see something fresh and new as well. But if you have an older congregation, it might be a little jarring. But even like our older congregation is part of our church, they really appreciate the messages too, because it's just plain and simple, and that we don't make any assumptions about what people understand. And so, again, maybe there's a way that you can communicate it in a way that they understand, that's simple and direct, but that others can understand as well. So it's finding that happy medium and experimenting with communication and language.
And I would just add, sometimes if you just have to say, so whatever you just have to say, make sure you explain it. And so even for me, even when I'm speaking and it's a plain Bible story that everybody knows, but this new generation, they don't know who Noah is.
Mhm.
Is that the guy on Comedy Central? Like, they don't
Oh yeah.
know who know or these Bible characters are. And so you say it and
Mhm.
then you explain exactly in very clear terms. So you may use a familiar term to us, and then
Mhm.
you use something that would be familiar to them and bring everybody together. And so that may
Yeah.
be another option
Mhm.
when dealing with congregations
Yeah.
that need to hear both.
And sometimes too, like my husband just recently did a message on our channel. She talks about, there's power in the blood and being washed with the blood and all that kind of stuff. If you think about that from an unchurched perspective, that's real dark. Like
Absolutely.
they do not understand what we're talking about, and it sounds very different to them than what we think of it as. Of course, we totally understand that, but you're trying to communicate to an external audience that has no point of reference from that other than horror movies. So often, it's what my husband says is he'll actually say, like, we sing these songs in churches like "Power, Power in the Blood," and he's like, "Well, what does that mean?" And so he says the thing that we all understand, and then he's like, "Let's dig deeper." And what's amazing about that is, like, even when I was listening to the message, I was like, I didn't know that. So oftentimes when we're speaking, we make assumptions and we don't dig as deep as we should. Like, why were
Mhm.
there prohibitions on the blood? What is the significance of the blood? What is the meaning of the blood? Like, he actually went through and broke it all down, so that, like, he had, like, the flag that said, "This is what I'm talking about, all you who already understand." But I'm going to go deeper, and I'm actually going to break it apart, take it into smaller little pieces, and I'm going to explain it so that everybody understands.
Yes, I love that. I love it so much. Thank you for that. I don't see any more questions. So that means that you did such an amazing job. You have answered all of our questions.
That or they're
We are complete.
overwhelmed. I don't know.
We are complete. And
Yeah.
so I'm excited to be able to send you all the resources, and don't just let them sit in your inbox. Take them, use them in your churches with your leadership, and make sure that you get some traction with this. And so, once again, Jamie, I want to thank you for being here. I don't know if you had anything else you wanted to add before we sign off.
No, just tune in for the next presentation. It won't be as long as this one. I think that was just an hour one. But thank you for those of you who stayed through this presentation. It's a lot of information, but I tell you, it is a game changer for ministry. So if you want to be relevant, if you want to meet your target audience, this is the way we go about it. We start with where they are, and you determine what their pain points, what their felt needs are. You meet those, and then you can open the door to the bid them come and follow.
Amen. I just want to close with prayer for our churches and our ministries and our leaders who are navigating this. And, it may be scary or unfamiliar. Well, number one, I commend you for being here. Number two, I commend you for learning. And number three, I commend you for trying. And I just want to pray God's grace on you as we close. And so, Heavenly Father, we thank you so much for this opportunity to learn. We thank you for the great harvest, oh God. We thank you, and we ask, oh God, that you would be with us. I pray, Lord, that you would be with the ministries represented here tonight. I pray, Lord, that you would be with the ministries and churches and congregations in this conference. I pray that you would bless them, oh God. I pray that they would show up with excellence in these spaces where people are. I pray that they would come with your love and your grace. I pray, Lord, that you would strengthen the weary hands, oh God. I pray that you would give wisdom to those who don't know what to do. And I pray that you would give grace, oh God, and love as they interact with people who may not be like us. But Father, we bless you. We thank you for this opportunity. May we use it well, and we will give you praise, honor, and glory. In the name of Jesus, we pray. Amen and amen.
Amen.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Jamie, and thank you all for joining us. Blessings to you all. Make it an amazing night and an even more wonderful week. Take care.
Thank you.